Difficult part of architecture is to start or to do something at all, because basically there is no guidelines. And I also think because of that in schools is also kind of a problem, because you cannot really be taught in a systematic way how you should approach. What I try at the very end is to produce a piece of architecture that produces a kind of an identity. Identity, I think, in the sense that the people surrounding it can in some way identify their own lives or their own existence. But I also try to produce a very general answer, and that's the architect's role, I think. Also opening this usually physical thing, physical piece, into something that is of general nature and that has to do with many, and that has to do with us. But what I think is very important is actually kind of the psychological aspect of architecture. So I try to think more about really like how do people relate to the work, far more than try to make it an objective statement. I do think that it's quite important to be still authentic. I think we can actually quite honestly do stuff that we find good ourselves. But I also think it's important to be empathic. I mean, empathy towards people I find good. And I think also both is possible, to be empathic and authentic. At least this is what I would like to do, and this is the kind of architecture I would like to do. I like also this kind of very strong authorship architecture, and I think I like it because I feel a human living inside. To a lot of buildings, I don't see building. I see biographies. I see their psychosis, and I like that. And I don't say that's the way to continue. The problem is, quite often we want to know recipes. How shall we do architecture? Shall we look at other stuff and copy it? Shall we do free forms and copy free forms? Well, I don't know. Architecture needs soul somehow, you know, it needs character, and I think it has character if it has identity. And what is identity? Well, identity is in a certain way if you see in your opposite yourself. See a bit your history, your past, your future, where you want to go, your troubles, your hopes, your wishes. Somehow works must stimulate this inside condition. I like many things where people do things, basically. So, I mean, I also think that somehow eventually it's a different question, like analyzing what is happening, and the other questioning. I was always interested as an architect, like, what shall I do, you know, like, I mean, this is why I was talking about no dogma buildings. And I think buildings with answers are really a problem. They shouldn't. I think a perfect piece of architecture would be a piece where you are stimulated, but you don't know why. That would be the best, yes. And the good thing about it is that eventually you would not stop being stimulated, because the problem is of dogmatic architecture is, as soon as you understood it, how it works, it's kind of over. So it's better to produce something that is not answerable, really. But I think, yes, just to come back, as an architect, that's our role. We must produce a piece with attention, which implies complexity to a certain level, but it should not be too complex in order that we don't care to look at it. So it must be the good degree of complexity. But same is with music. Theoretically, you know, I could be amazed by everything. But now let's talk maybe what am I really impressed with or so. I mean, of course, music, it's also actually a part of my past. I used to be a musician. I was doing jazz music, and I stopped at one moment, probably as many when I went to School of Architecture. And yes, and also there was a kind of a time when I wanted to go back, because I realized that somehow music in a quite abstract way has quite something to do with architecture. Yeah, we were just about the difference between music and architecture. The beauty of architecture is, for me, is that it's physical, which I really like. And what I also like more and more on architecture is that you can be not illogic. I mean, you know, if I just put this stuff on top of each other, I do have something. Even though, I mean, we can just say it's a glass and a thing on top of each other, but it's also much more complex. But what I like about the physicality is, at one moment it's just reality. I mean, it's just built because it's just how it physically is. And this idea of that we can in architecture, we can be opposite to something physical that we eventually don't understand. What I'm always very impressed also lately when I was in China is how well the interhuman networks work. And I find this really fascinating, and I think that's a difference to Europe. How easily people talk in the street with each other, how seemingly almost familiar they are with each other, how little distance there is. Like, it seems like if you need a little information, be it asking man to man, it's really easy and very normal also in a certain way. And I also think, for example, I'm quite fascinated, you know, by your also, like, let's say, digital connection, like these WeChat groups or something. Like, you know, like if somebody would ask a question, how fast and how honest and how good the amount of responses are that you get back. So, and I think that that has something. I felt in China always something very constructive, actually, between humans, and their ability to interact. I often ask myself about identity. You know, like, what makes you feel, I don't know, home or good or something like this. And in those cities that I have been in China, I mean, usually it is maybe those gardens, and I remember especially in the past there were usually men would go walk their birds in the parks or so, and I somehow thought that eventually these are the centers, these emotional centers. But I remember, for example, last time in Nanjing, I didn't really find, for example, this emotional center, or the main museums were so cramped, or that it could not really produce this or so. So for me, this is something I'm looking for in cities, and I did not really find it. But of course, I mean, it's fantastic how these cities grow and are contemporary, and I find also fantastic how this technology works, how it's possible that so many people are able to commute in this country with all these trains and technology. I mean, again, I think because of technology and so on, I find fantastic. But I think this idea of where are you home, even if you're abroad home, this is a very important question. Also, as a foreigner, I have a big respect for Wang Shu's work. I have the impression there's like 3 different times or conditions. In Hangzhou, the very first building I find interesting. Let's say for me, from outside, this second phase, this Hangzhou thing, I think that's what I wanted to express with general. You know, that I think that we architects always have to produce something that is very general, that is very broadly understood, something very principal about mankind. And I think he managed there very much, even though, of course, it has this remnants of, you know, of these roofs, it has this timber, the way the timber is used, it has these courtyards, it has many things that I'm sure it's straight out of Chinese typology and forms, but it also is a very general piece on how people could live together and how roofs protect and give space and take it away of the rain and of the sun, and how you can connect and this kind of I find very good. So, and when it goes too postmodern, of course, again, I have no clue what is right and wrong. But for me, it's suddenly almost a dogma. And also I have to say, I just don't feel home. You know, when I was at university, I imagined, well, I would love to be a student now at this university. That's where I want to be. It's really fantastic. And it seems somehow some architecture has this ability to be authentic, somehow all these topics we had here, but also general, and then just produce this match.